Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. Better never to have been, better to cease to be is a new paper by CJ League. As the title suggests, the argument here is about non existence. If it was better never to have been, that is, if non existence was preferable to coming into existence, then it would also be better to go back to non existence. In other words, it is better to die, a view which is traditionally called pro mortalism. Remember the famous quote by David Benatar: life is bad, but so is death. It is that badness of death that is in question here. Before we look into the actual argument, let's understand what the paper is and is not about. This is not about the process of dying or the badness of such process. It is about the state of being dead. In other words, it is not about going into non existence but being in non existence. It is also not about how other people, like the loved ones of the person, are impacted. That is the suffering through bereavement of death. Although such bereavement informs something on badness of the state of being dead. The paper is also not talking about when one should die, although it goes through some thought experiments to compare badness of death when one is in their prime to that when one is old. But that is only for evaluation of badness. And the paper is not talking about the methods of death or collective extinction. It is specifically about the badness of the state of being dead for the one who dies. One more point that the paper is not arguing is the Epicurean view, which is that death is neither good nor bad for us because we can't experience it. Let's call that state of being dead as death for short. If death is not bad and not a harm, and if non existence is preferable to existence, then death is better than continued living. That is what the paper calls pro-mortalism. Benatar provides two particular arguments why death is bad for the one who dies, and therefore why pro-mortalism does not follow from antinatalism. One is deprivationism. That is the view that death deprives us of future good things. Taken from the human predicament, Benatar says death is bad for the being who dies because it deprives that individual of the good that he or she would otherwise have had. This is the deprivation account of the badness of death. And another is annihilation. That is, it destroys us. Again, in the human predicament, he says one possibility we should consider is that death is bad in large part because it annihilates the being who dies. For the deprivation account to work, there is an underlying asymmetry about existence. Before we were born, we did not exist. This non existence is called prenatal non existence. After we die, we will again not exist, but this non existence is called posthumous non existence. Now, if we have to claim that antinatalism does not imply pro mortalism, that is, it was better to never have been, but it is not automatically better to stop being, then there must be some difference between these two non existences. But both are non existences, we are just giving labels to them. How can they be different? Well, before one is born, one cannot be deprived of good things in life since one does not exist as a subject who can be deprived of. But once one is born, existing as a subject with interests, death can deprive one of more good things. That is why there is an asymmetry between these two non existences. Here, CJ Leak, the author of this paper, is not differentiating between the interests in continuing to exist and goods of life. All interests amount to a desire for some good in life. So we have to evaluate what are we deprived of because of death. Was that actually good that we are deprived of, or was it bad that we can be saved from? This is where Benatar's own quality of life argument is employed. Recall that according to this argument, even the best lives are very bad. In chapter 3 of Better Never to Have Been, How Bad is Coming into Existence, Benatar evaluates in detail how bad our lives actually are. All human lives contain much more bad than is ordinarily recognized. So, if you already exist, then the rest of your life is also bad. It may contain some good, but overall it is bad. That means we are not deprived of good. In fact, if we decide to stop continuing our lives, it may save us from some bad. As a result, death would not deprive one of good life, but instead spare one from a bad life overall. There is one more case to consider. Quality of life argument relies on objective quality of life independently of how one feels about it, or at least it attempts to do such thing. But people can have a subjective impression of quality of their lives. Such impression might be positive. They might feel that overall quality of their life is good, and such a feeling might in fact contribute to actually improving their lives. We employ a combination of mechanisms to feel good about ourselves. We have an optimism bias. Over a period of time, we learn to adjust our expectations according to the reality that we live in, and we find other people who are in worse condition than ours and compare with them to feel good. All of this is not grounded in truth, but it helps to improve the quality of our lives. But would such subjective mechanisms lift the quality of life so much that continuing life would be worth it and death would be bad? Well, the raise in quality should be such that it is still bad to come into existence and yet not bad enough to die. The quality of life argument suggests that in most cases, such subjective mechanisms are not enough to render life as overall good. So, a cheery outlook will not make a sufficient difference to flip the value of death from good to bad. But there could be a small minority of people whose objective quality was only slightly below the threshold of making it good, and their subjective mechanisms helped to flip the value of their life to overall good. But that will be a minority. And two, the goodness and hence deprivation from early death is very small. Even on this generous view, it still seems that one would be barely above the threshold and have a life barely worth continuing. In other words, death would only be a slight deprivation. The second reason for badness of death is annihilation. That is, death destroys the one who is dying, and the assumption is that is bad, and therefore death is bad. But the question remains, why is annihilation bad? In case of deprivationism, whatever we were deprived of had an intrinsic value, and deprivation was just a product from lack of instrumental value to achieve it. But this is not the case with annihilation. So we have to find what is that intrinsic harm that annihilation is causing. Annihilation in this context is not a biological annihilation. It means destruction of consciousness, memories, mental states, so whatever one needs as identity. So, a terminally comatose person is already annihilated, although their body is not technically dead. Remember, we don't want an answer like annihilation is bad because it prevents us from doing such and such thing in future, because that just becomes deprivation, which we have already looked at. So, why is annihilation bad? Benatar hints at mourning of loved ones. The fact that we mourn the death of our loved ones suggests that their annihilation was intrinsically bad. You could argue that we are mourning their suffering that they had to go through during the process of dying. But Benatar invites us to consider a person who has become terminally ill and then eventually died. In such a case, we should mourn when that person got sick and in fact celebrate when he dies because he was relieved of all that suffering. But we mourn his death, and this suggests something inherently bad with annihilation. C.J. Leake plays a trick on this. He invites us to imagine a terminally comatose person. He is mentally dead but biologically alive. Notice that the person was annihilated technically when he went into coma. But when do we mourn? Sure, we would feel bad when that person goes into coma, but we actually mourn when he dies biologically. So then this suggests that annihilation might not be bad after all. Benatar's argument fails to address the potential badness of annihilation. This is because it pertains to biological death, which is different from annihilation, which is psychological death. Thus, even if it's the case that we mourn at one's biological death, even after they have died psychologically, we are mourning something other than one's annihilation as understood. Moreover, we don't know if people mourn the loss of a person to them or for the sake of the dead person himself. There's also an interesting thought experiment called the limbo man. This figure shows two lives on a horizontal x-axis as a timeline of life. As you can see, there is a regular life which lives through its course with some goods. It's a continuous life shown by a horizontal line, and there's a limbo man. This man has capacity to choose to go in coma for a certain period. This period is shown by a dashed line. So he lives some part before going into coma. The goods that he enjoys during that part is goods A. Then he goes into coma, and then he wakes up and lives through the rest of his life enjoying goods B. The crucial point here is goods A and B remain the same whether the limbo man chooses to go in coma or not. Yet he goes into coma just so he can delay his death. That tells that there is something good in delaying death more than just summation of goods in life. So badness in death has something bad in it apart from the deprived goods of life. That is annihilation. If we think that limbo man should delay his death by going into coma, then we think that it is better to delay his annihilation even though total goodness in his life remains same. So annihilation is intrinsically bad, or is it? CJ Leak says it may just be his preference, or he fears death, or both, but Limbo Man does not prove that annihilation is bad. You might argue that his fear of death is because of annihilation is bad for him. But the question is that always the case? CJ Leak tweaks this a little. Suppose that if he chooses not to go in coma, then he will get slightly more goods in rest of his life than the goods that he would enjoy after he chooses to go in coma and then wakes up. Leak says that the prudent option is to not go in coma. In other words, selecting a short life with more goods is better than a longer life with fewer goods. Although not in the paper, we can see this logic used by smokers and alcoholics. Even though they might be using it as a temporary justification for short-term pleasure and may not have considered entire length of their life seriously. Anyway, the point is by choosing shorter life with more goods, tells us that we give deprivation more importance than annihilation. Moreover, it's ambiguous whether annihilation is distinct from deprivation. Starting with Benatar, there is arguably indifference as to whether annihilation should be something distinct from deprivation or represent a further deprivation of an additional good. And since with quality of life, we fail to see how we are deprived of overall good life, CJ concludes that if it is true that it is better never to have been, then it is better to cease to be. Speaking of death, there was one more paper, Why Death is Most in One's Self-Interest and Necessarily So, by Victor Kriska. This was more of a direct claim that death is better for any sentient being if they have to go only by their self-interests. The argument says that if we have some options to choose from, then we need to choose an option which minimizes our bads but results in no loss of any of our goods. Now, can you imagine any way which minimizes our bads but does not result in any loss of goods? Say you're bored and so you go to a nice movie. The badness of boredom is minimized or removed, but there are some goods that are lost. You have to pay for the ticket and also pay for the commute, and then there is opportunity cost. Instead of going to a movie, maybe you could have done something much nicer, something more meaningful for you. So there does not appear any option which just reduces bad at no loss of goods in real life. Yes, not in real life, but the paper claims this happens in death. Death minimizes bads in our life as it prevents us from experiencing them, but it does not result in loss of any goods for us, and therefore death is the most prudential option to choose from. But how are we saying that death does not result in loss of goods? That is the whole point of deprivationism. All the goods in life that we would have experienced had we not died at a certain time are not available for us to experience because we died. Victor Kriska does not deny that the goods are prevented, or more accurately, we are prevented from experiencing them. His point is that such a prevention does not amount to any loss for us. Loss is the keyword here. He says that the prevention of one's good appears to be a loss, but prevention of one's good by means of death can never lead to a loss for oneself. Well, how? For that, we need to look closely at what it means for something to be a loss. At least two requirements must be met for something to genuinely be a loss for oneself. One, that one does not or will not have the thing, and two, it would be better if one did. But in case of death, the second condition is not met. That is, because Victor assumes that nothing can be better or worse for the one who dies, and so even though all those goods are missed because of death, they are not a loss. Death prevents one from enjoying one's good. but it never causes one to lose or lose out on it. It makes no difference how much good one's life contains or potentially will contain when thinking about the prudential nature of death, because good is never lost for the one who dies. This is why a very controversial thought experiment arises. Suppose there is a person whose life is extremely good. They face no harms and get pure pleasures. But sometime in future they will experience a pinprick resulting in pain only for like 5 minutes, and they are in possession of what Victor calls an omega elixir, a concoction that quickly and painlessly results in death for whoever drinks it. The majority view here will be that that person should not take the elixir just to avoid 5 minutes of pain. But Victor says this majority view is mistaken. Given that the action of the elixir is both quick and painless, one is compelled by self interest to drink it. That's because death will avoid and hence minimize the small bad in that person's life. But as we have seen, the potential goods that he will not experience is not a loss to him. Therefore, it is in his interest to drink the elixir and die. This is called hard Thanatism, a view that death is in one's interest necessarily. Note that this paper is not talking about the process of dying. Victor also cautions against self termination based on his arguments because of three considerations. One is the process of dying might involve suffering, and it may not be in one's interest to go through it. Secondly, there could be loved ones who would suffer as a result of our death. And it is not just grief of death. We may have dependent parents or even worse, dependent children and so on. And thirdly, we might be contributing to the society at large. So just because it is in our self-interest that death might be a prudential option does not automatically mean we should act upon it. A new book was published on 3rd January 2026, Christian Antinatalism, Reconsidering the Theology of Procreation by Kirk Lockheed. Now, of course, the book is counterintuitive. Generally, we associate the religions like Christianity with pronatalism. In fact, only last week we covered a paper arguing against David Benatar's antinatalism from a Christian universalist's view. Kirk, in this book, attempts to develop a defense of the surprising and counterintuitive view that it is always or almost always impermissible for Christians to procreate. In the footnote, he says, more specifically, the view I examine says that it is wrong for Christians to procreate in the actual world, though there are possible worlds where it would be permissible. With almost 200 pages, the book is divided into three parts. The first part is about counterintuitiveness of antinatalism in Christianity and historical, social, and biblical references to antinatalism. Second part focuses on what contemporary antinatalism is, mainly David Benatar's antinatalism. Third part goes into meat of the topic, talking about intersection of antinatalism and Christian exclusivism, which is the view that Christianity is the only correct theological belief system. It then addresses Christian universalists who eliminate the possibility of hell by claiming that all humans will eventually be saved by God. Finally, we also see some objections to Christian antinatalism. Antinatalism has intersections with so many aspects of our life, and religion is one of the very important ones. Moreover, Christianity is arguably the most dominant religion in the world today. Therefore, it is great that such work is being done, so thanks to Kirk for doing this. Speaking of books, a new book, Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for Life Enslavement by J. Charles was published recently. It looks like the main idea is you're born in debt and as a slave to various systems. From birth, you are bound by the rules of the state, society, and culture, and so on. Your parents impose existence on you without your consent to serve their own interests. The warning of this book is interesting. It states this book offers no comfort. It provides no reassurance that things will get better or that the system can be reformed. It documents comprehensive enslavement and proves that those who benefit will not voluntarily relinquish power. Revista Genedas is a leading digital publication on philosophical pessimism for the Spanish speakers. Their fifth issue was recently published. It is in Spanish, but the title translates to Theories of Annihilation. It includes essays by many different authors and has a bit of everything: antinatalism, extinctionism, critiques of pessimism, accelerationism, and even philosophy of technology. It opens with an article by Sarah Diarna on proto-antinatalism as a metaphysical problem. This is followed by an article by Santiago Sanchez, who offers a critique of 19th century pessimism based on the notion of suffering. The third article by Ruben Mantella addresses the issue of extinction based on the work of Emil P. Torres. The fourth article by David Garcia discusses the thesis of aphilism and outlines an annihilationist ecology. Then H.G.W. Gamage distinguishes between annihilationism and extinctionism, comparing the philosophies of Mainlander and Hartmann with that of Horstmann in The Monster. That Horstmann, I think, is Ulrich Horstmann, and the monster might be a translation error for his book The Beast. According to Wikipedia, in his book The Beast, Horstmann actually goes so far as to suggest the use of nuclear weapons in order to bring forth the extinction of the human race. The last article by Camilo Guevara presents an internal critique of accelerationism. Accelerationism is the belief that existing social, economic, or technological systems should be pushed to develop faster. That is, they should be accelerated, sometimes even to the point of breakdown, in order to force radical change. It has variants like left-wing accelerationism, right-wing accelerationism, and effective accelerationism. This article criticizes specifically a variant of right-wing accelerationism, the one proposed by an English philosopher, Nick Land. Finally, there are 3 translations of philosophical texts from English to Spanish. Even though I've not been able to read the full translation, it is clear that there's a great deal of work, care, and philosophical conviction. It is refreshing to see a journal engage difficult and unpopular questions with such seriousness and consistency. The editors and contributors deserve a genuine appreciation for sustaining a space where pessimism is treated not just as a curiosity, but as proper questions demanding philosophical seriousness. So, thanks to all those at the magazine. Nimrod is a very busy antinatalist activist and whose work we have covered in the past. He has done many street outreaches and tours of European cities talking about antinatalism whilst also asking people to not have children. But this time, he is doing something different. He has started a new blog reviewing movies and shows containing antinatalist content in them. First such blog was about the show True Detective and the antinatalist characters in them. You can read about it on his website don'tprocreate.org. I'll include the link in the description. On to some notable videos that I watched this week. Conundrum made an excellent video explaining David Benatar's arguments, mainly in Better Never to Have Been. He provides us with a logical sequence from empirical observations of our values to the antinatalist conclusion. This includes the 4 asymmetries around procreation, the underlying axiological asymmetry, quality of life argument, the evaluative conclusion that coming into existence is a serious harm for us, and therefore the normative conclusion that we should not cause this harm to others by having children. He explains each of these arguments and provides an analogy of driving a car to navigate through them. He also covers the subjective mechanisms people use in order to think that their lives are good, even if their lives might actually be bad. Then there are some extra considerations like clarification between a life worth continuing and a life worth starting, abortion, extinction, death, other animals, and so on. I think this video is a very nice work as a gentle introduction to David Benatar. Nowadays, there are just so many videos on antinatalism and in various different languages. One such video was in Hindi by a channel called Dumb Like Me. This focused mainly on consent argument. It compared the non-consensual procreation with non-consensual romantic appeals. It's a very watered down video, only scratching the surface of antinatalism, but good to see that more and more people are at least asking the question about having children. Those were some of the updates on antinatalism this week. Thanks for watching and see you next time.